3 starving children crawl up the hill towards me, terror etched on their faces. COVID-19, where I live, has led directly to a brutal outbreak of violence. But right now that war has ended. I need to eat. What's for lunch? Eggs on toast. They drop their sticks and run inside. Good evening. I'm not sure why I'm saying good evening because it's the morning here. I'm a little disorientated speaking to you at 2 removes, one of space, one of time. I don't even know when you're going to be watching or listening to this. But today, distance is not important. As this global pandemic has shown, we are adapting. We have adapted more than ever to being in different spaces together. My children, who you just heard, have spent most of the time during this pandemic playing. I had a teacher once who said that if an actor has forgotten what it was like to play as a 6-year-old, they should not be an actor. We play all the time, tell stories, adopt roles. So deeply they become ingrained that we believe as we grow and become adults those roles to be who we are. But they are simply a story, a narrative coming out of the culture we are grown in that surrounds us, in which we are bathed. In biology, we use the word culture to mean maintain in conditions suitable for growth. You bathe a cell in a culture and it grows. How are we going to grow now? When are we going back to school? I'm not sure. Why not? Listen, I'm really not sure. Do you want some ice cream? The truth is, a few weeks ago, I felt unsure about anything to do with the future. I had no idea if my children were going back to school. I had no idea when I will play in a theatre again. I didn't know. And in a way, I'm not sure I care so much because the questions that are posed by this run much deeper. So what now? Lockdown here has been eased. We wear masks, we socially distance. But in the UK, the members of Parliament who make up the Conservative government, the ruling Tory party, are yelling for 2-metre rules of social distancing to be thrown out. Let's go back to normal, they cry. But time can't be reversed. We can't go back. The laws of physics only allow us to move forward. So what is this forward? What world are we now creating? During this time of pandemic, we notice that traffic on our roads descended to levels not seen since the 1950s. Air pollution reduced, such that asthma-suffering friends of mine who live in London high-rise blocks suddenly felt able to breathe. And with the murder of George Floyd, we are asking ourselves questions we have been ignoring for too long. How deep does our racism run? Why are we here in the UK and other European societies still unable to look deeply at the narrative of history that has created the societies we are? How do we listen anew? And all of these questions leading to one question: can we change our behaviour, our culture? Culture. The word culture comes from the Latin cultus, which means care, and from the French colere, which means to till or work the ground, literally with our hands. And it shares its etymology with a number of words related to actively fostering growth. So our growth, our forward development, is intimately connected with our culture. Culture is not something separate from our lives to be grown or experienced in theatres, galleries, books, concert halls, or streamed to us from multiple sources all over the world. It is who we are. I wrote that last night in our house here in West Gloucestershire. And then I walked outside and watched the clouds covering the stars. It's cold here. The first bite of autumn I heard in the valley below, the kiwicking of little owls, the children of owls trying to find their parents. I saw the silhouette of the 3 apple trees on the slope below us. heard the foxes bark, and I know that if I don't take out the rubbish now, or if I leave it outside, it'll be strewn by those same foxes all over our grass. I tell you these things to tell you where I am, where I live, here, now. Before we know it, it'll be winter. On a winter's evening, the 18th of December, 1994, in a gorge of the River Ardèche in France, 3 French speleologists crawled through a tunnel 30 inches high and 10 inches wide. They pulled away a stone, they went down a gap on a corded ladder and sensed in the darkness they were in an immense chamber, dozens of meters long, tens of meters high. Eliette Brunel, the woman amongst the 3 speleologists, raised her torch and cried out. That was probably the first human cry in this cave for 25,000 years. Our light flashed, she said, onto a mammoth, and then a bear, then a lion. And then we saw human hands, both positive and negative impressions. Here now I've clicked on that stenciled hand on the rock wall of the Chauvet cave in the Ardèche. It was painted 35,000 years ago. Painting hands onto cave walls, of course, was not place-specific. They were everywhere, not just in Europe. In the Liang Tempesuna cave in Indonesia, dated to at least 39,000 years old. That's 4,000 years before Chauvet. And there are others in Turkey, South Africa, Iran, Norway. And in Las Cuevas de los Manos in Argentina, there's a wall of hands, very much like those ones in Chauvet, but they date to 9,000 years ago. Yesterday. All over the world, hands that were placed on rock, perhaps wood too, that felt the contours of the stone, as if the rock was coming to meet them, connected. And they blew through bones, perhaps, stenciled their presence, the same way, for 30,000 years. I'm wondering, at what point did artists come to be considered separate? I'm tempted to say detached from the rest of society. Perhaps here in Europe, we can trace that from the Enlightenment onwards, from the moment we began to split mind from body, science from art, ourselves from nature, perhaps. But I'm thinking about today, when there's plenty of evidence that artists are now considered outside the New World Order. People to entertain, they are. Not to be listened to. They're sometimes a nuisance, a hindrance, even a threat. They came with chisels to the Kamakawaka cave in the Xingu. The Xingu is in the Mato Grosso state in the eastern Amazon, an area of about 2.7 million hectares returned to its original inhabitants in 1961. In the Kamakawaka cave, artists from thousands of years ago carved a narrative of identity of the mythical hero ancestor Kamakawaka and his people. They came with chisels, smashed and hammered out the symbols, the animals, to try to obliterate the story on these sacred walls. Who were they? We don't know, but what we know is that soya fields, owned by global corporate companies who have for a while wanted to expand into the Xingu, run right up to and around the area of this cave. They also came with dynamite to Palmyra, and here in the UK during the last 10 years, they have brought their own subtle chisels to the courses for arts for British children. The current government have laid waste to a generation with intentional neglect. Well, art is just seen as yet another product. Its value determined by how much you can sell it for, separated from its maker and their process. The narrative promised by this culture is only one of ever-increasing profit. Today, we have the facility to connect with each other all over the world, to listen to each other, see each other, yet, curiously, we feel more separated than we have ever been throughout history or prehistory. country from country, people from people, people from animals, people from the earth they stand on, the present from the past, the living from the dead. I mean, how can we have got to the point where we consider ourselves separate from nature? During the last ice age of the planet, those hunter-painters, hunter-artists, felt themselves to be part of the populations of the immense herds of animals they followed on foot. These men and women looked at the rocks in the Chauvet cave underground and sat with the rock and with the animals, indissolubly connected. We above ground, skating over it with our speed, our distraction, we do not see animals. We look at them most often as parts under cellophane, separated, disjointed, dismantled, as has been our language. The British writer Robert Macfarlane, in his book Landmarks, observes that recently the Oxford Junior Dictionary, used in schools by our youngest children, culled words to do with nature. Words such as acorn, adder, dandelion, ivy, otter, to be replaced by words such as block graph, chat room, celebrity, because, as the editor informed a questioner, words of nature no longer reflected the experience of Western childhood, disconnected as it is to the passing of seasons and the physical experience of the landscape we live in, detached from the here. And where is our now? Sometimes we are persuaded our culture is so instant it's only about the present, but the truth is the opposite. Our present is tiny, it's momentary. We live in a time of the very recent past and the immediate future. I want that, I will purchase it, I buy it, and now it's in the past, and I need the next thing. We are cut off from the deep continuity of an immense past and an infinite future that should be part of our now. So what is our place as artists in this cacophony of voices, noise of information, image, narrative that overwhelms us? What story to tell now? Yet how to begin? Brecht asks this question in his poem to Danish theatre workers, written in the late 1930s and here translated by Anja Bostock and John Berger. Yet how to begin? How to show the living together of men? How to reveal not only yourselves and others floundering in the net, but also make clear how the net of fate is knotted and cast and knotted by men. How do we begin to find the words, gestures, lines, notes to close the gap that seems unbridgeable? A scream rents the air. Did you hear that? My son runs out, still holding a piece of toast. He slips his hand into mine. Yep, that sound, that scream, what was it? In the concerto of birdsong, it was hard to hear anything. Then a whistle was followed by a high-pitched mewing scream hovering above the valley. It's a sparrowhawk, look. We look, and we listen. It vanishes. We go on listening, the thrushes begin again, no traffic. In the blue skies, the drone or trace of transatlantic shuttles that normally create a crisscross of plumes above us have gone. This time has brought much suffering, but also perhaps another narrative. We listen to a different story to the insistent one of mass consumer society, one that demands that we stop and connect to the world around us, to each other, to observe it. And what is observing but listening? I'm listening now to the past, to Bertolt Brecht. To observe, you must learn to compare, he says. To be able to compare, you must have already observed. He who does not know what to make of his observation will observe badly. The fruit grower will look at the apple tree with a keener eye than the strolling walker. But only he who knows the fate of man is man can see his fellow men keenly with accuracy. The art of observing, he tells us. What does it mean to be an artist now, or a teacher of art? I have no answers. I know that the word art has its origins in an Indo-European word, ar, which means to fit together. And we all know perfectly well we cannot escape being part of nature, just as we cannot escape the planet. So perhaps, by knowing and demonstrating the nature of men, you will teach others to lead their lives. You will teach them the great art of living together. I'm looking at the image again. It's a left hand. The finger of the artist who painted it had a crooked finger holding out my own hand. Try to fit it with his or hers. Just as now, I'm trying to hold out my hand to yours.